Do 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 do. Thank you for reading a book. Hey y'all, it's me, Kevvie. So this month, I participated in my very first Readathon. Back at the end of May, I was watching Becca over at Hicks Picks Books discuss her June TBR, and she talked about how she was participating in a Golden Girls Readathon. I don't know if I've mentioned it in here before, but I love the Golden Girls. Literally, as long as I can remember, I have watched Golden Girls every single night when I go to sleep. Love it. It's such a comfort show. It makes me so happy. So even though I'd never done a readathon before, and I had no idea how it works or how to participate, I knew I wanted to do it. I followed the link to Rachael Fryman's announcement video where she explained how it all works, so I decided, let's give it a shot. Basically, you have 10 reading prompts, 5 of which are common to all participants. The other 5 are dependent on which girl you chose. I chose Sophia, not because she's my favorite, I don't really have a favorite, but because Becca asked me to do Sophia. Apparently, all the years they've been doing this Golden Girls Readathon, Team Sophia has always come in last place. So sure, I'll read for the underdog. Then for the duration of the event, starting June 4th or June 1st if you were Team Sophia, to June 18th, anytime you finished a book that fits one of those 10 prompts, you log the number of pages you read on the Readathon's website. The goal is for your team to read the most pages. The first book I read for the Readathon was Miss Pinkerton by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. Every book I read for the Golden Girls Readathon happened to fit more than one prompt. So for each of these, I'll tell you all of the prompts they could apply to. Of course, I only counted them all once when logging them. So for Miss Pinkerton, it contains a character over the age of 50, is written by a woman, and is less than 200 pages. According to Goodreads, it's 232 pages, but the final 30-ish pages were a preview of the next book in the series, which I didn't read. I'm waiting till I actually read that book. So I just counted up to the end of the novel. So with my first book of the readathon, I counted 198 pages toward Team Sophia. I really enjoyed Miss Pinkerton, and I would consider it my favorite Mary Roberts Reinhardt that I've read, apart from The Great Mistake. But it's a solid second place. I have a separate video about this book that I made with the Booktube Goddess. That'll be linked up in the thing and down in the description. The next book I read was Frida Kahlo's Diary. I actually bought this book to read for a Pride video, which will come out later this month. And I was thrilled when I realized it would apply to some of the Golden Girls prompts. While it was written much earlier, it was published in the 90s. It was obviously written by a woman, and I counted it as being written by an immigrant because Frida Kahlo spent some time living in America. Rachel, who created the readathon, said that it's okay to stretch a prompt to make it fit what you're reading. So even if the immigrant prompt isn't a perfect fit, I still counted it. I thought this book would take me a long time to read, but I actually flew through it in 3 days. I'll go deeper into my thoughts on it in the other video. This book was 296 pages toward my Team Sophia reading count. Right after I finished reading Frida Kahlo's Diary, I watched a video by Nell and Scott over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. They discussed a book from the Harlem Renaissance called Passing by Nella Larson. It sounded really good, so I decided to read it right away. This book fits 2 prompts. It was written by a woman and is under 200 pages. It's about 2 light-skinned black women who pass, and the differences between how they pass. Irene only passes for things like dining out or going to the movies, but then at the end of the day returns to Harlem with her black family. Claire lives as white and hides her blackness from everyone, including her super racist husband. Passing was really good. You think you can see where it's heading from a mile off, but you're wrong. It still managed to surprise me. The ending of it was so much fun. Oh, I loved it. This is a book I would definitely recommend, and it gave me 140 pages toward Team Sophia. After Passing, I had a hard time choosing the next book. I started and stopped a couple because I wasn't getting into them or they were taking too long to read, but eventually I found one that I enjoyed and breezed through. This sweet story was written by a woman and features a found family. The book is The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchinson. While this book is from before I started Booktube, I assume it's already been covered to death, so I won't bother going too deep into it unless y'all would like to see me do a Butterfly Garden video. Let me know down below. The Butterfly Garden is about a wicked, disgusting disgusting man known as the gardener who kidnaps women, tattoos giant butterfly wings across their back, and keeps them captive in a large greenhouse. This book has dual timelines. It alternates between FBI interviewing one of the victims and flashbacks to her life inside the garden. I really enjoyed this book. It was so dark and sick and twisted. Sometimes I'm really in the mood for that kind of stuff, and this really hit that sweet spot. And with that, I got another 288 pages for Team Sophia. Next, I read The Lady Vanishes by Ethel Lena White. This was an exciting read for me because the 1978 film adaptation starring Sybil Shepherd and Angela Lansbury is one of my favorite movies of all time. I loved being able to read the book that film was based on and draw comparisons about what I preferred from each version. There's also an earlier film adaptation made by Alfred Hitchcock, but I haven't seen that one yet. The story's about a young woman named Iris who's traveling all by herself across Europe to get back home to England. On the train, she befriends an elderly governess named Miss Froy. However, after a short nap, Miss Froy has disappeared, and nobody but Iris seems to remember her at all. It's up to her and her alone to find Miss Froy before it's too late. Oh, it's so much fun. Such a great thriller. The Lady Vanishes counted toward 2 prompts. Written by a woman, and once again I'm stretching a prompt, has girl/girls in the title. Lady is a synonym for girl, so I say it counts. I intend to make a separate video elaborating on my thoughts on this book for my Who the Fuck Is That series. But until then, The Lady Vanishes scored me 256 pages toward Team Sophia. I've wanted to read The Mystery of Mrs. Christie since it came out last December, but I've just been in the habit of reading Christie after Christie after Christie, so this one kept getting skipped over. However, when I remembered it was historical fiction, which is one of Sophia's prompts, I knew this was the perfect opportunity to finally read it. The Mystery of Mrs. Christie is about Agatha Christie's disappearance in 1926. She was missing for over 10 days, and when they found her, she claimed to have memory loss. And to this day, nobody knows exactly what happened while she was gone. So this book is a fictionalized hypothesis of what could have happened. I won't spoil what happens. I'll just say I really liked this theory. This book was another dual timeline, alternating between her disappearance in the present and a manuscript documenting her relationship with her first husband, how they met, their marriage, and how it turned sour. I really enjoyed reading this video, and I might do a video on it after I read the other Agatha Christie historical fiction novel, Woman on the Orient Express by Lindsay Jane Ashford. I believe that one takes place a few years after the events of The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, and I think it'd be fun to discuss the two of these books together. The Mystery of Mrs. Christie counted toward the prompts written by a woman and historical fiction, and contributed an additional 292 pages toward Team Sophia. The next book was also recommended by Nell and Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, and it's The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Technically it's a short story, but it was available as a standalone text, so I counted it. Reading a short horror story really appealed to me, especially during the readathon, trying to get through many books as fast as possible. The Yellow Wallpaper also satisfied a prompt I had been struggling with fulfilling, an author name that starts with G. So with this half-hour read, I was able to complete a prompt I thought I'd have to skip entirely. Yellow Wallpaper also checked off 3 other prompts. Written by a woman, less than 200 pages, and published in the 90s, because it was originally published in 1892. It's about a woman who is ill, but her doctor husband doesn't believe her. He makes her move into this rented mansion and stay in this room with awful yellow wallpaper. She writes in her diary over the course of staying in this room, and as her respite progresses, you witness her descent into madness. It was a fun little read, and it gave me 22 more pages for Team Sophia. Next, we get to my very first Agatha Christie of the month. I am shocked I went so long without reading Agatha Christie, but I had started it earlier in the month and just couldn't get into it. But as we were getting closer to the end of the readathon, I finally bunkered down and got through it. Oh yeah, it's called Pocketful of Rye. I chose this one because 1, it was on sale last month, and 2, I stretched the prompt contains a recipe, because this book's premise comes from the nursery rhyme 4 and 20 blackbirds baked into a pie. Technically not a recipe, but it is baking, and they did say we can stretch the prompts to fit what we read, and I took full advantage of that. This book also contains a 50-plus-year-old character, Miss Marple, and is obviously written by a woman. I'll save the rest of my thoughts on this book for my next Agatha Christie installment. But in the meantime, I clocked in 257 pages for Team Sophia. My penultimate read for the Golden Girls Readathon was Paradise by one of my all-time favorite authors, Toni Morrison. Paradise was published in the 90s, had a 50-plus-year-old character, and was written by a woman. I really loved this book, but I gotta say, Toni Morrison is not an author to rush through. I really struggled with reading this for the readathon. I normally read shorter books that are quick to get through, but with Paradise, I'd read for an hour and feel like I didn't even make a dent in it. Eventually, I got the audiobook and read along to it while listening at triple speed. I just wanted to get it done and over with before the end of the readathon, and doing so just does not do this book justice. This is a book that you need to sit with and stew in and just really take your time, which just doesn't work when you're doing a readathon. I learned my lesson for next time though. Paradise is about these women who live at a convent that get gunned down. No, that's not a spoiler. It is the very first line of the book. They shoot the white girl first, but the rest they can take their time. Then after the shooting, they go back and introduce us to these women and show us how they wound up at the convent and why these people would want to murder them. Beautiful book. Just don't read it the way I read it. Allow yourself plenty of time to soak it in. When I finally finished it, I got a whopping 319 pages to count toward Team Sophia. At this point, I'd completed 9 books for the readathon. I could have been done, but I was so close to having 10, so I wanted to try and squeeze in one more. I spent hours trying to find a classic standalone short horror story written by a woman, and eventually landed on The Mortal Immortal by Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein. Or is it Frankenstein's monster? The Mortal Immortal is a classic example of the burden of immortality, continuing to live on when everyone around you that you loved dies. I wonder if this was the origin of that concept, that immortality might not be such a good thing. I enjoyed reading such a short classic, and with that contributed my final 23 pages to Team Sophia. As I blasted through these books, I gave no consideration to whether or not double dipping was permissible. It wasn't until close to the end that I considered whether or not we were only supposed to read one book per prompt. Fortunately, as I looked through what I read, I realized I could neatly arrange everything so that each prompt was accounted for. Like so. For prompt 1, 50-plus-year-old character, Miss Pinkerton. Prompt 2, published or set in the 80s to 90s, Paradise. Prompt 3, has girl/girls in the title, The Lady Vanishes. Prompt 4, features a found family, The Butterfly Garden. Prompt 5, written by a woman, The Mortal Immortal. Prompt 6, less than 200 pages, Passing. Prompt 7 contains a recipe, Pocket Full of Rye. Prompt 8, historical fiction, The Mystery of Mrs. Christie. Prompt 9, author name starts with G, The Yellow Wallpaper. And prompt 10, featuring an immigrant, Frida Kahlo's diary. I was also curious about how many times I'd read each prompt. Contains a recipe, historical fiction, found family, girl in the title, author name, and buyer featuring an immigrant were each only read once. I read 3 books each for 50-plus-year-old character and published or set in the 80s to 90s. 4 of the books I read for the readathon were under 200 pages, 2 of which were under 100 pages. Under 50! All 10 books that I read were written by women. That's pretty typical for me, though. Even when I'm not exclusively reading Agatha Christie, the vast majority of what I read is written by women. In total, I read 2,091 pages for Team Sophia in the Golden Girls Readathon. I am incredibly proud of myself for that. As someone who really struggled with reading as a kid and continues to be a really slow reader to this day, over 2,000 pages in just over 2 weeks is huge. Going into it, I only expected to get 3 or maybe 4 books done, so I far exceeded my expectations. let's take a look at the final scoreboard. To be fair, I'm recording this midday on the 18th, so the exact numbers may fluctuate between now and when the readathon ends. But I don't expect things to change that much at this point. Team Sophia won by a landslide. I suspect that the readathon organizer, Rachael, advertising the fact that Sophia had come in dead last every previous year, made a whole bunch of people want to read for the underdog. And it worked. Sophia is the clear winner by over 5,000 pages. Team Blanche came in second place, followed by Dorothy, and Team Rose in last place. I suspect that teams Dorothy and Rose may have only had one member apiece based on their final reading totals. Not to brag, but I mean a little brag. But I read more than the entirety of Team Rose. I guess she'll be next year's underdog. But yeah, Sophia is the clear winner with close to 30,000 pages. Over 2,000 of which were from me. This was my very first time doing a readathon, and I really enjoyed it. Having all of these different prompts encouraged me to escape my Agatha Christie hole and actually read other things for a change. And I enjoyed everything that I read. That said, I don't see myself doing readathons very often. I am extremely competitive, and as a slow reader, I've been pretty stressed the past couple of weeks trying to rush through as many books as possible. For a few of these, I listened to the audiobook sped up as I read to keep up my reading pace. I'm glad I got it done and did as well as I did, but I don't want this to be my regular pace. I would risk losing enjoyment very quickly. So for me, readathons will be far and few between. How'd you do in the Golden Girls readathon? Let me know what you read in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if it pleases and sparkles, I'll see you in the next video. Mwah!